Hello everyone, it's exactly 8 days to the Presidential and National Assembly election, and despite the Supreme Court ruling, President Buhari has only extended the use of 200 Naira notes by 60 days, saying the other old notes are no longer legal tender. Thanks for joining us on the program. Let's find out what you think about the president's speech earlier today on Twitter. Tag me at Nifemi Ogutoye, use the hashtag TVC Countdown 2023. President Muhammadu Buhari today announced that the old 200 Naira notes will remain a legal tender until April 10, 2023. During a nationwide broadcast, the president apologized to all for the difficulties experienced in accessing the new Naira notes. He said the old 500 and 1,000 Naira notes have ceased to be legal tender from 10 February, explaining that they can be returned to the Central Bank of Nigeria. Let's have more details in this report.
Of the loopholes associated with money laundering.
A national broadcast that was widely anticipated, but leaves so much more to be desired. The Central Bank of Nigeria's currency redesign policy has drastically weakened the purchasing power of citizens, an outcome that was least expected. President Muhammadu Buhari's directive that the old 200 Naira notes should be reintroduced as legal tender contradicts suggestions made by the Nigeria Governors Forum and the advice of the Council of States for the old currency to coexist with the new Naira notes until they are gradually phased out.
I have given approval to the CBN that the old 200 Naira banknotes be released back into circulation, and that it should also be allowed to circulate as legal tender with the new 200 Naira, 500 Naira, and 1,000 Naira banknotes for 60 days from February 10th, 2023 to April 10th, 2023, when the old 200 Naira notes ceases to be legal tender.
The president has not considerably shifted grounds. He insists this currency redesign will restore the statutory ability of the Apex Bank to keep a firm control over the money in circulation, as about 2.1 trillion naira out of the banknotes previously held outside the banking system had been successfully retrieved.
I have been reliably informed that since the commencement of this program, about 2.1 trillion naira out of the banknotes previously held outside the banking system had been successfully retrieved.
President Muhammadu Buhari seems excited that the new monetary policy will contribute to the minimization of the influence of money in politics, which he says is a bold legacy step by his administration to improving the electoral process. But for Nigerians, the biggest gain will be to have access to cash, as they will have to wait for the central bank to improve the circulation of the new Naira notes.
And reactions continue to trail Mr. President's approval of 200 Naira old note circulation for the next 60 days. The latest is coming from a civil society organization, Center for Social and Economic Rights, which has now condemned the violence that broke out in some parts of the country as a result of insensitive and provocative implementation of the Naira redesign policy. In a press statement by the Group Executive Director Nelson Ekujimi, it says the pains and anguish inflicted on innocent Nigerians may, by the inhuman implementation of this policy, has degenerated into pockets of violence. And on the president's speech, the group is saying recognizing only the old 200 Naira as legal tenders by law a contempt of court. The big question will be whose declaration should Nigerians comply with, the president or the Supreme Court? Well, one thing is certain, that Nigerians are confused as to who to believe. The president is given a directive contrary to that of the Supreme Court. So we spoke to Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Professor Paul Ananaba, to explain separation of powers and who Nigerians should obey at this time.
By those sections 287 and all that of the Constitution, the president is mandated by the Constitution to carry out the decisions of the Supreme Court. In the past, Nigerians are part of this problem because in the past, the Federal High Court or the State High Court will make pronouncements and we'll just sweep them by the side because we consider them lower courts. Today, it has grown to Court of Appeal and now at the Supreme Court. I don't imagine that the Supreme Court will make a pronouncement and any government official of whatever level goes and to say something contrary to that. The framers of the Constitution placed the legislature as Section 4 of the Constitution and placed the executive as Section 5, placed the judiciary as Section 6. It is deliberate. Now, the actions of the legislature and the executive will be tested and interpreted by the judiciary and by the realist school of jurisprudence. What the courts say and nothing but that is the law. It is what the courts say that is the law. The situation now that I said, that was why I said there was going to be a crisis because the citizen is left between choosing whether to obey the president's speech or to obey the Supreme Court. And having told you that what the courts say, and the Supreme Court is the court itself, because it is the last court. So I will advise every citizen of Nigeria to obey the Supreme Court because that's what the Constitution says, Section 27. And I believe that the president will address the situation. He will remedy it. I believe so because I don't think that he intended to get what you will be hearing from the citizens. He is the father of the nation, and he cannot ignore his children. He cannot ignore Nigerians. It cannot be that either a president or a governor or any other highly placed person in Nigeria, officer, will, by the person's speech or comment, void an existing pronouncement of the court.
So what is the law? What the court says or what Mr. President is saying? Well, Professor Paul Nanaba is going with the court. The president's position is quite contrary to the position of the Supreme Court. But can Mr. President overrule the Supreme Court? We also spoke to Senior Advocate of Nigeria and the Attorney General as well as Commissioner of Justice in Lagos, Muyosore Unigbanjo. Let's listen to his position.
This directive or this speech by Mr. President is quite contrary to the injunctive order granted by the Supreme Court. And I believe Mr. President has enormous powers, no doubt, in the Constitution, but those powers does not include the power to sit on appeal in respect of a decision of the Supreme Court or any court for that matter. So as far as I'm concerned, as a lawyer and as the Attorney General of Lagos State, the interim order of the Supreme Court still stands, basically because Mr. President, even in all his enormity, cannot overrule any order made by the Supreme Court.
Nigerians have two directives, one from the Supreme Court asking that the old notes remain legal tender pending the hearing of the substantive matter. Mr. President earlier today is saying only 200 Naira old note is considered legal tender and every other old note should now be submitted at the Central Bank of Nigeria. We spoke to a cross-section of Nigerians to have an understanding of what they feel about this new development.
It's a welcome development, but we still need that 500 and 1,000 because the small money, we cannot carry it as bunch. But when we have 1,000, it will be easier for us.
People are suffering because of this money. People are suffering too much. We can't buy anything in the market. The small one we have, they told us to go and deposit in the bank. Okay, we reach bank, they give first money. It's only 5,000. 5,000 cannot buy anything.
200 Naira cannot solve our problem. Because that 1,500 is the major high currency that people need to buy what they want to buy. Because other people are having 1,000 naira in their hand, but they cannot use it. If you buy something with this 1,000, they have to give you change of 200. But when you give them this 1,000, they reject it. Is it not our currency? It's our currency, even though it's old one. But let them give us chance, time, so that when the new money circulates, then we can use everything.
The people that were doing the protests, the way they were doing scattering bank and other things, trying to go and break CBN, I was not happy over it. But at the end of the day, about 3-4 people died. But I was so sad about it.
The conversation is live online. Olalekan Ojomu is saying Mr. President's decision is unconstitutional. It shouldn't be allowed to stand. The National Assembly should reconvene immediately and look into the issue. Join the conversation using the hashtag TVC Countdown 2023 as to what you think about Mr. President's speech earlier today vis-a-vis a contrary directive via the Supreme Court ruling that came in on the 8th of February. How are state governors handling this latest pronouncement from President Buhari on the Naira redesign? Just yesterday, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu warned those rejecting the old Naira notes to stop or face prosecution. He said the rejection of the old 200, 500 and 1,000 Naira notes is contrary to the position of the Supreme Court. Governor Sanwo-Olu's warning is coming after the Supreme Court adjourned the case on the Naira swap policy of the CBN till February 22nd for hearing of the consolidated suits by 10 state governors. Kogi State, just like Lagos, is also a party to the suit, asking the Supreme Court to stop CBN's deadline. A few hours before President's speech this morning, the Kaduna State government released a press statement via the governor's special advisor on media and communication, saying that they had a conversation between some people from the federal government and governors who were talking about the fact that the 500 and 1,000 Naira notes have been destroyed by the banks. They seem to not have believed this narrative, and they are saying that the 200 Naira note is not enough to take away Nigeria's suffering at this time. Senior correspondent Ayodele Uzubaku joins me to discuss this very interesting development. The president asked for 7 days. I think it's way more than 7 days before we eventually heard from him. Some are talking about, let's begin with the timing of the president's public intervention. It's coming, his speech is coming on the heels of the violent protest in Edo yesterday, where a certain number of people were reportedly killed. Would you say that his intervention is rife at this time?
If you look at the way Muhammadu Buhari is, if you look at the style since 2015, the president cannot be referred to as ever being proactive to issues like this. There's this kind of laid-back attitude that it takes time. He said it himself that he normally weighs things, that it takes him time to make decisions on things like this, and he came with his broadcast, and a lot of Nigerians are looking at that. However, that it's belated that people are still holding on to the old notes, and people are still, they still have a kind of circulation that's legal tender, as the legal tender, while the governor of Lagos State is giving an order. But from the speech of the president today, you know abundantly that the 500 Naira, the 1,000 Naira, however it suits you, it might not sit down well with you, is now a thing of the past. Yes, this might not be going according to the ruling of the Supreme Court, but the truth of the matter is that, you know, we have this, what we call exclusive lists. And out of those 68 items on the exclusive list of the federal government, there's a monetary policy is strictly in the purview of the federal government. Whether the federal government can be the final arbiter, the Supreme Court will decide. Will decide that. But Governor Sanwo-Olu might say lacks the locus, lacks the power, lacks the do you understand? You know, the authority to tell people that this is what you have spent, that this is the legal.
But hasn't the Supreme Court already decided with its ruling? Because the idea, for instance, what some senior advocates of Nigeria is talking about is the fact that the duty of obedience to the court order is for all and sundry. And where there is an order from the court and you're dissatisfied, the best thing to do is to appeal against the order, not say, I'm not going to obey it.
The federal government has not said they are not going to obey it. It's just they are going ahead with that plan. And the order of the Supreme Court, a lot of people say that it's an interlocutory order that has a time span. And we're not sure if it was extended yesterday. But the lawyers in that court yesterday said it was extended. And the federal government, they've gone ahead to say 200 Naira intervention will come in, but 500, 1,000 Naira is not eating of the past.
Let's talk about what this means for the All Progressives Congress that is coming into this election with a power of incumbency. Just a few hours ago, Zamfara State Governor, Ogun State Governor, I think Lagos State Governor have boldly come out to say you are going to be prosecuted if you don't take these old notes. Just a few hours before Mr. President's speech, the Kaduna State Governor preempted what Mr. President was going to say when he said that the 200 Naira notes alone is not going to resolve the challenges that Nigerians are currently facing. How do you see the party move on from here? Because even the APC governors have taken the presidency to court.
Very interesting times ahead. Lufemi, the House divided against itself, and they are not speaking with one voice again, and a lot of suspicion within the House. And if you remember that the formation of APC is like an amalgam of different political parties, and these legacy parties, they are beginning to take different position. You have the CPC element and the ACN element, actually taking positions and everything. And if you remember, the candidate of the party belong to the ACN, and the president belong to CPC, while some alignment and realignment has been done, but the House is currently divided against itself.
It looks like they're not really
wait for the Supreme Court on the 22nd of February.
That intervention is coming some 3 days before the presidential election.
Yes.
So the big question will be, how much impact will all of this have on APC's chances in this election? It would seem that even at the rallies, we see Mr. President and the APC presidential candidate, share a smile or two. He holds his hands. He's still doing his duty to support the party's candidate. But apparently, the APC governors are not quite excited about his decision on the CBN policy.
They have their ways of solving their issues, resolving their issue. Ultimately, they'll sit down the round table and something will give. But ultimately, what we're looking at is the sufferings of Nigerians, so that they'll be able to make things easier for Nigerians and this Naira to be accessible for Nigerians.
Absolutely. Attention is now turned back to if Mr. President's decision is going to bring the much anticipated relief. Already we see that the fuel queues are already dwindling. It looks like there's been a significant intervention in that regard. It's not as bad as it was, a few days ago. But with the 200 Naira note, what do you anticipate? Do you think that it will take a while. Cash crunch is
it will take a while before this thing will circulate. It will take a while. I can tell you that the Nigerian Security and Minting Company that has just started printing the new notes, they don't have the capacity. They don't have the capacity to actually print the amounts that was mopped up out of the circulation. They were told that we had 3.7 trillion naira outside the banking sector. And if it was 3.3 million naira, as of last month, that they were able to mop up 2.9 trillion naira. So if you are going to give an alternative currency or you're going to print new notes, you should be talking in the region of 2.5 trillion naira, 2.7 trillion naira to be able to at least to ease the,
the tension
in town right now. So maybe the 200 naira, by the time it's injected, I don't see it easing out immediately, but with time, it will come out.
Let's talk about how stakeholders can intervene, because yesterday in Delta, in Edo, and then I think in Oyo State, there were some really violent protests and attacks in parts of the state. Who are those that must rise up now and speak to Nigerians that approach is not going to be accurate? It's not going to solve the problem. Destroying bank facilities perhaps going to make the situation worse than it currently is.
I expect the Council of States meeting that was held last week, those former president and everybody to come together, and they should be able to tell Mr. President and even bring the CBN governor that look, pending the time for the full implementation of this, you have to extend the deadline. And these things, good policy, but what we are looking at is the deadline. The deadline will make sure that, look, I still have like 20,000 Naira old notes with me. And I looked at it. I gave to a vendor this morning and said, no, Oga, I'm not taking it.
I'm not taking it.
I attempted spending it, at the filling station and said, no, we're not taking old notes. So it's quite chaotic. A lot of Nigerians, they still have that money in circulation. So they are looking for opportunities the window to be extended so that they'll be able to, do away with this old money. And if the new ones are available, why not? The new ones, will be able to get it. And as a matter of fact, Nigerians are, they are willing and eager to abide by whatever the federal government wants to do in regards of this new currency change.
Absolutely. Let's just bring in Commissioner for Information in Kogi State, Kingsley Fanwo. We're running out of time, Mr. Fanwo, but very quickly, talk to us about how the Kogi State government is reacting aftermath Mr. President's speech this morning.
Thank you very much, Master Aware. We all listened to what Mr. President said today. We are reviewing the situation. There is no clear line of action right now. But as we are also aware, the case is before the Supreme Court, and they will resume hearing on February 22nd. We are very confident that the Supreme Court will go ahead with the case, and whatever decision they arrive at, we are confident that we have a president that respects the rule of law. So that's where we are hanging it right now. Not confrontational, but just to toe the line of constitutionalism and believe in the rule of law. So that's what we are holding on up to right now.
So how soon before we get the reaction that you talked about?
We are not going to go beyond the case we already instituted at the Supreme Court. The process is going on, and it has been adjourned till February 22nd. So on February 22nd, hopefully, Supreme Court will be able to either arrive at a decision or reserve a date for judgment eventually. So we are going to wait. We are going to wait for that decision of the Supreme Court.
Commissioner for Information, Kogi State, Kingsley Fanwo, thank you for talking to us on the countdown. It would seem that the governors are now relying solely on the decision of the Supreme Court, and we have to wait it out.
Yes, ultimately, final arbiter.
Absolutely. Ayodele Ozugbako, senior advocate of Nigeria. Senior advocate, journalist. Thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight.